Welcome to the 4F, 4Fs with Jeff.
Hi, I'm Jeff Clough, and welcome back to the 4Fs podcast. On this episode, we unpack how deep curiosity and relentless pursuit turn ideas into breakthroughs. Today, I'm joined by Chris Walker. To call Chris a software pioneer is accurate, but it doesn't do it justice. Chris worked on projects ranging from Dartmouth's time-sharing labs and early BASIC compilers to work on some of the early synthesizers, including one favored by the king of pop, Michael Jackson himself, and ultimately how he helped guide Windows NT through Y2K. We'll hear how a single 512-byte packet sparked the world's largest malware scramble, why your morale budget can outshine any policy memo, and how lessons from teletypes and floppy disk viruses still impact us today. This is a really great episode. I hope you enjoyed as much as I did.
Hello.
Hey, what's going on? So, how was the celebration with your folks? We haven't talked since then. I think you told me they were kind of you said kind of like the grandfathers of the town, and you went out to celebrate with them, right?
So my parents, I grew up in this town, and my mother died in 1996, and my father died in 2013. And they were more or less, town fathers and stuff. And we ended up selling the property to the town as a park.
Okay.
Since it was have you ever seen The Sopranos?
Yeah, of course.
So the runner for that grew up in my town, little tiny suburban town. And so it's mostly one half acre to acre lots. And my parents owned 17 acres.
Oh, wow.
Complete with a pond and the fields. And people used to skate on it. We donated it to the citizens in the wintertime to skate on. It was not a government run thing. It was like a private little thing. But it was like $5 for a membership. And it paid for the caretaker to make sure that kids got rescued if they fell through the ice and stuff.
That's important. No,
anyway,
I saw a picture that you had on your, I was prepping for this, and I saw a picture that you had on your Facebook profile from a long time back. Not your profile, but just a post some time back. There was I could see the house in the background. There were people skating on the lake. So that's the place that got donated.
Yes. Right. Exactly. And I'm actually in that picture. I'm 2 years old in that picture.
Oh, really?
My mom is teaching me how to skate.
That's cool. That's a cool memory, I mean,
it is,
and that's also a really cool legacy for you and your folks. That's really neat.
Yeah. And what's really nice is the town is actually keeping it up, because the alternative was to sell it to a developer and turn it into about 12 lots.
Yeah. Which, I mean, there's a place for development, I guess, but also that's really neat that it's going to be there, and it's, kids for a long time are going to be able to enjoy that, and families or whatever it is, whoever it is, as long as it keeps freezing over. And,
Well, yeah, global warming.
Yeah, it's there. Yeah.
So global warming was starting in the 40s, actually, according to my parents, because they actually ran a little ski tow operation in northern New Jersey, and they kept looking at the standard low temperatures, and they went, yeah, this is not a good long-term thing. So they bailed out, but we still had skating for free. But by the 90s, the number of days safe skating, would drop precipitously.
I mean, look, I don't have any, real empirical data on my specific experience here, but I live in Utah. It snows a decent amount here.
Yeah.
Just, in the amount of time I've been skiing here, it feels like temperatures are different, and it feels like the snow is different, and like it's not as much as it used to be, especially at the lower elevations. So yeah, man, I get it. That's cool that they had a tow rope, just like a little tow rope setup. I bet that was a blast. I bet
it was really goofy. I mean, it was in their salad days, right? They didn't have much money. My dad was living in a very small house with my mom, and they did this on the weekends because that's when they weren't working. And my mom ran the hot dog stand. That's very, the refreshments, I guess, is what you call it.
But yeah, I mean, so you say they're salad days. Tell me what that term, I'm not familiar with the term. I think I get what you mean.
So you can afford a salad, non-meat.
Got it.
Think of graduate students or something like that.
Yes. No, I get it. You're only ordering a salad because the protein's too expensive, right? It's not a life choice. We're not choosing vegetarian or vegan here. We're eating what we can. No, I get it. That's funny, man. Well, so Chris, I want to just say this before we kind of jump into this. I super appreciate this. I don't know if I said it before, or So this is the third episode of the podcast, but man, the conversation that your story that we're going to ask about here in a minute is like the reason that I had this idea a year ago to start a podcast. I don't know where it's going to go, how many people are going to listen to this thing, but for me, it's been really cool. And so I just want to say thanks for jumping on here. And it's really cool for me because I don't know. Like I said, I remember reading the story that you were talking about with Y2K. We're going to talk about in a minute. And just thinking, gosh, people need to hear this story. This is so cool. I want to, and frankly, I want to learn more about this.
And now I don't remember which story I gave you.
Well, it was there were a couple of them and it was a conversation between you and several other people talking about Y2K and how it was, much ado about nothing. Anyway, we can talk into it. So,
Microsoft was a big company, right? And so I did my section of Y2K, and so I had my view. But that the Facebook group's got everybody, right? And so if you throw out something, does anybody remember this? Someone will remember. Like it's really kind of cool.
It's really cool. And as I've done this prep, it's cool how, to your point, how wide that view is. Everyone was involved in something there in that group, and that group's tremendous. And also how close some of the relationships are, like you specifically, as I've been reading through prepping here, there are really influential people in that group. I see it as influential, and, there are all these really close relationships. It feels like the company was very different back then than or even just a few years ago than, especially than it is now. Right. I mean,
funny, when I came in, people were complaining that the company was too big, that they remembered it when, they could just walk into Bill's office and scream at him and then walk out.
I would be terrified. I would think about making a decision like that, maybe for a second, and then I would just immediately back down.
But the culture was very open, and that culture stuck around for quite a while.
So I guess let's maybe jump into it then. So like on that note, your thoughts on the culture, like the culture was very open. And it's interesting because I still see when I joined, I didn't join Microsoft until 2012. And I also thought it had a fairly open culture compared to my past, but it seems like that's all relative, right? So I'd love to hear your thoughts about that. And if you want, maybe this is a good time to just kind of jump into it and hear about, your career, just a rough overview about, your early life and how you got into tech in general.
So I don't know how you measure openness, right? Because, I came in and I was told it was open. So I just trusted people, and so I would go and ask questions or whatever, because that's what HR said the culture was like. And I only occasionally got told, you shouldn't have done it that way or something. You shouldn't have done it in front of that other person, more political sort of stuff. But in general, you kind of speak your mind and you don't hold grudges, because that doesn't get you anywhere. But, some people do. But there were, we hired people from other cultures than that were more subservient, I might say. So apparently we hired a bunch of people from Russia because we could. And it turns out those people are very politically astute about who you can say things to and who you can't. And they're always like looking around to see if it's okay. And it takes some time to retrain those people. It says, no, we want your ideas out in the open to say them. They were, culturally, they weren't, the nail that sticks up gets hammered down. So, and that's
interesting.
Like an anti-Microsoft culture, right? And then there are things like the Japanese have their own culture about if you're older, you automatically get.
You have a little more respect. There's a big culture around respecting experience and experience is valued as time, right?
Which is just for age, but it also works the other way around, right? Where if you're young, they discount you, which is not a Microsoft thing, at least back in the day.
Yeah. I would say that continues.
Yeah. So, we had a bunch of cultures that came in, and it, you could imagine that things change over time, right? Also with the size of the company.
Yeah. So when you joined, tell me what year you joined at Microsoft?
So it's a little complicated, but I joined as a contractor in 1989, worked for a year, and then I left and came back in 92. I should not have left.
You say you should not have left?
Yeah, but I came back to work for the same group, but financially I shouldn't have left.
Oh, sure. You're just thinking because the stock prices between 89 to 92, or just in general, it just wasn't the right.
No, it's just so was the stock prices, right? And I really liked working there. I just wanted to go work someplace else because I thought that would be great.
Yeah.
And that didn't turn out to be great, but my fallback was to go back to Microsoft. and that worked out great.
So you took a year break.
No, it was more than
a couple of years, but 89 to 92. Sorry, math was off there. Yeah,
2.5.
Okay. And so where did you go in that break?
I went to the old Microsoft building on Northrop Way, strangely enough, and there was a little company there that made mortgage origination software for PCs. So it did all the paperwork up until the time you signed for a mortgage. So all your verification of employment, credit stuff, blah, 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 all the legalese that you have to sign off on. And it was specific for every county in the nation, every state, county, and even Guam. So we had people wandering around reading legal documents and writing them up. But I was doing just software stuff. And my development environment was Xenix. I don't know if you know.
No, tell me. I mean, so I'm generally not technical by nature, but also, this is I know the reference to Xenix, but I couldn't tell you much more about it.
So Xenix was a Unix clone authorized by Bell Labs and sold by Microsoft.
Interesting.
Microsoft sold operating systems. They sold OS2, MS-DOS, Xenix, later, obviously NT, Windows. So they had this multi-user operating system, windowed kind of clunky thing back in the East. And the cool thing about it was I could develop under Unix. The compiler for C, etc., would produce code for MS-DOS. So I could develop on Unix and produce a binary that would run under MS-DOS. Believe me, development on MS-DOS was painful back in the day. But under Xenix, it was pretty nice, actually. It's because it was Unix with all the tools.
I mean, multi-language compiling, that seems pretty sophisticated, especially back then. Yeah, that's...
Yeah. It was pretty cool.
That is cool.
It was very cool.
Yeah.
And then but anyway, it never got a GUI interface to it and stuff. And eventually Microsoft, I think, sold it to SCO. So there was another company selling it.
So you left for a little bit of time then. So did you, for those 3 years, what ultimately, I totally understand the desire to, try something else, kind of expand your wings a little bit, so to speak, and try something new. But it seems like that was something that, I guess didn't stick for that long. Was it, you just decided this is the challenge that I wanted? And then what was it ultimately that brought you back in 92?
I had a pointy-headed boss.
Okay.
When I first arrived there,
boss,
the best boss I ever had. It's great. I loved working with him. He was really smart. He protected my time, so we weren't allowed to work on the weekends or basically after 5 o'clock. And I had young children and stuff. And he was really, really smart. And then he retired, and he was replaced by someone who did not understand software, literally. And so, that didn't work out really well in the end, but it got me to leave, so that worked out.
So it got you to leave. So the boss that you're speaking of, that you really like, this was at the mortgage software company, right?
Right.
Okay, so you were like, he was there, really liked you, respected your time. Was this fairly unique at the time, to have a boss that was protecting your time? I mean, Microsoft is known for having a culture, hard work and long hours. So I'm guessing this is pretty unique to have someone who was saying, hey, look, don't work after 5, protect your time, protect your weekends. And, being a parent of younger kids.
So tech wasn't so hardcore as Microsoft was most of the places. So he had worked at Boeing. He was a physicist and had worked at Boeing as, I don't know if you remember his name, the Lazy Bee, but people were discouraged from working overtime there as far as I can figure. And the engineers were unionized. So you put in the time, but you walked away from it. And Microsoft had the other culture, the old joke about someone leaving after working 12 hours and he stuck his head in. Have you ever heard this one?
No, tell me. Yeah.
Stuck his head in and there was Bill and Steve and he said, I'm going home. I've been here for 12 hours. And Bill was reported to say, what, only working half days? But yeah, so certainly by the time I was working at Microsoft, there was a culture that you put in long hours because you knew the product needed it and you knew you were kind of the tip of the spear as far as like you weren't working for some backwater company. You were working at a company that was going to affect a lot of people. So, why go home?
And there was this feeling and understanding that this was a very impactful company even in 92. I mean, we're in the middle of the .com boom around then. The company in general just wasn't as big as it is now, obviously, but still you knew that, hey, this is a big deal. this company is going to impact a lot of people, or is impacting a lot of people. So we have a responsibility to show up and
Right. And it's your work that's going out there, right? It's not like you did the one little corner. People own big chunks of work.
I could see that. So at that time, what were you working on in 92? We're back from the mortgage company. So in 92, what do you focus
So in 92, so one of the reasons why I left was because I was actually hired into a test team back in 89. And I didn't think of myself as a tester. I was a developer. I was good at testing because I knew how to write code and I kind of knew the issues and stuff. There was more to life than that. So then I went in development and then I came back. And by that time, we had ditched OS2. The joint development agreement with IBM had been ripped up. And we were working on Windows NT. And that had people like Dave Cutler running it. And it had much higher goals for reliability and extensibility than OS2 had. So it got rid of a lot of legacy stuff. Brand new code. What do they call that? Brand new code. Version 1.
Version 1, okay.
Greenfielding or something like whatever it is. So it's always nice when you start with new code as opposed to picking up 20-year-old code and saying, oh, yes, I need to fix something here. So wherever you look, there was plenty of work to do.
So you were working on NT.
I was working on
greenfield, new code
in the GUI area. So graphics, video drivers, shell, GDI, that sort of stuff. Not networking and not kernel, which were kind of the big three at the time. Okay. Kernel was run by Dave Cutler. So all the device drivers and kernel services, that sort of stuff. Anyway, so I was in the test group that did the GUI and a few other things. App Compat, we ran 16-bit apps in a 32-bit operating system, and that was an interesting little section. Still is. Actually, I think they got rid of it finally, but yes. You can't run 16-bit apps and 64-bit operating systems. Go figure.
Yeah. Who'd have thought? Yeah, who'd have thought?
But I remember when I left in 2009, they were still struggling with getting that to work in certain SKUs because it was still, people still wanted to run them.
I'm just thinking in my mind, you said that, two numbers, 92 to 2009. I mean, that's a pretty long run at the company.
Yeah. Although I have compatriots that are still there.
Really?
Over 30 years.
I love seeing those announcements in the Facebook groups about people. See their
Raymond Chen, right? Raymond Chen?
I mean, yes, of course I know of Raymond Chen. I've never had a conversation with him, but I know the name, of course, yes.
So he was in my new hires orientation.
Wow.
I did not know that at the time, but yeah.
You didn't know that he was there, or just kind of who he was?
Yeah, he wasn't anything at the time. He was a new hire.
Fair
right?
Yeah.
It's like he wasn't famous yet, right?
So yeah, okay. Yeah. I didn't realize that. So okay. That makes sense. But I read a couple of your blog posts talk about Raymond Chen. He was pretty influential. So, I mean, I'm familiar with the name, but like maybe for someone who's listening, would you mind kind of sharing a little bit about what that means to what Raymond Chen would be mostly famous?
Raymond came in, I think he started working on Windows 3.1 or Windows 95. Windows 95 probably is what it was called back then.
Okay.
Or Chicago, I think is what this code name was.
Oh, name Chicago.
Yeah. And then eventually Windows 95 shipped and Windows 98 shipped and stuff. And they moved people over from the 16-bit Windows system over to the Windows NT group to work on futures. And Raymond came over at that time. But Raymond has a very good memory for things, and he would know the history behind stuff. So he was also very good at debugging. So he was often brought in on very odd problems, and he would just figure them out.
That's a unique skill set, I think, is to be able to just see things in a different way, and then combined with that legacy knowledge to really understand and sort out a problem. I can see what that.
He was also an interesting character in that he could be blunt, even when bluntness was kind of in the culture. Blunt, even that kind of bothered people. But he also came from East Coast, New Jersey, and he went to prep school, so he tended to wear ties to work, which was not what people did at Microsoft, right? I remember when I went to work for the mortgage company, they inaugurated casual Fridays where you didn't have to wear ties to work. And I'm kind of going, Microsoft, it's casual Friday every day. It was like, but famously they gave Raymond, they said, Raymond, you have to come in one day without a tie. And he says, okay, I'll do that if everybody else comes in with a tie. So actually have a picture of this, of the Windows 95 group with Raymond without a tie and everybody else with some form of tie.
I love that. I love that. That's classic Microsoft. That's a great anecdote. So at this time when this is all going on, I'm just thinking they somehow convinced you you kind of started. You were saying that you're like, gosh, I wasn't really into being a tester. Like I was a developer. I could figure. It turns out I was good at testing because I had these skill sets. But you ended up having a pretty long run in testing.
Yeah. So it turns out if there's a class of testing where you're doing a lot of development work, you're you're developing programs to test interfaces, various sorts. Or let's say you want to do a GUI testing. Well, you develop programs that drive the mouse and do screen captures and compare it with previous sources. So there's a lot of development work. For someone with a hammer, everything is a nail, right? So we
Sure.
code, right? But there's a certain class of testing that basically was very hard to do with code. So when I was a manager, I owned app compatibility testing, which meant here's a new operating system, and we hope it runs all this previous software that ran on this operating system. Can you test that? So you go and buy 1,000 different pieces of software off the shelves. Literally, you used to go into stores and just buy a bunch of stuff and then try it. And then somebody has to try it, and then it blows up, and then somebody has to debug it. But by try it, it means you go in and try to do as much functionality as you can. And you do this like weekly. So it's a lot of manual labor. And it may be, so you're grabbing people and you say, here's a piece of software you've never seen before, test it. And by the way, you only have 3 hours because we have another piece of software, right? So some people actually really excel at that. I mean, they can just kind of look at the manual, quickly go through and go, oh, I know what to do. And and then they find bugs. And then there are bugs in the operating system because they tested it on the previous operating system and it worked. New one didn't work. And then they write up a bug report. They're not programmers, but there's some sort of intuition about it. It's a lot easier if you actually write programs to look at the interfaces and kind of go under these specific circumstances, you get this kind of a bug. But once those things stop finding bugs, you have to, you know, find them in higher levels, basically. So there are a bunch of people like that worked at Microsoft.
These are the people that you're finding, you're bringing in, and these are people that you find and were on your teams eventually. Yeah, that's cool. Um, I actually feel like you had a little more to say there, and I don't want to cut that off. So I got excited when I was thinking about something else, but to
So
back that up.
you did have a list of questions you were going to ask in some sort of
Oh yeah,
order,
yeah. Well,
but I don't really care about order.
okay.
I'll try to go with this.
No, this is good. I did have a handful of questions that I was thinking to talk through. So since we're talking about tech for a minute, I think if you're okay, we can come back to the part about the early life here in a minute, just together how we see fit. But yeah. So I wanted to ask as we talk through kind of the timeline of your career at Microsoft, about Y2K. And this is the conversation saw this sparked. And so I was hoping we could look at this from aspects. So one, if you can tell us a little bit about what was going on as we were started ramping up for Y2K. I don't know anything about this from your perspective, but my assumption is thinking about Microsoft culture that this wasn't something that we started talking about internally, in October of '99, right? This is something that had been going on for a while. There was a risk. And so I was hoping if you could tell about where you're at in there. And then also if you could give some context for people who maybe are listening to this, who, aren't ultra familiar with the Y2K bug, what the public called the Y2K bug. I don't know what it was called internally.
That was Y2K work.
Okay, Y2K work, sure.
So basically, Y2K work is caused by kind of a generic bug of not saving the complete date, but truncating the date to, let's say, the year, the digits, the last 2 digits of the year. And so when it goes over a century, all of a sudden 99 goes to zero. So if you're just looking at stuff and didn't realize that zero meant actually the next century as opposed to the beginning of the previous one, then any sort of arithmetic that you do on dates would be off completely. Also, some programs may not work very well if they see like a 00 as a date. It's like, that doesn't make any sense. We didn't even exist before 1984 or something like that. And they blow up.
And
So that was kind of the problem. There are other versions of a Y2K bug. Again, when the counter kind of basically overflows, there's a version of it under Unix and C, um, where there's a 32-bit counter for the number of seconds since January 1, 1970. And that's what everybody takes that and kind of turns it into a date. Okay. And that's been around since Unix and C. And so anybody that programs using that particular counter is going to run into the same problem in 2038.
so the way the counter works is that it's effectively to calculate the date. It's taking the number of seconds that have passed since 1970. That's the calculation.
Right. And then you kind
Oh,
of break
wow.
it, right?
So I heard about this bug. I didn't know what it was before. That makes sense. So that bug will impact people who are still coding there. You said what date? 1938?
38.
1938, yes.
So it's a little bit off. And it
But
turns out
still, but not that far.
there is a replacement for it, which is 64-bit, as I remember. So, we have enough time. We should be able to convert interesting programs over to use a 64-bit. But, prove it to me. Show me that if I'm using a piece of code, does it not use the 32-bit version?
Yeah.
So it was deemed another funny thing, I realized. So we started doing this in early 1998. I had to start going to meetings to cover the Windows NT response, basically, to the Y2K bug. And everybody thought it was just going to be a testing problem because Bill Gates had famously told people for a long, long time that Windows NT was designed to be Y2K compliant, that not have this bug, right? So I don't know where he got that information. It probably was designed to be Y2K compliant. In other words, they didn't say, oh, we need to save every byte, and so therefore, we're only going to have 2-digit years. Baseline stuff had 4, right? But that doesn't mean that individual programs or layers would kind of go, oh, I don't need 4, I'm going to throw it away. People that designed Windows NT and wrote it down in 1988 maybe didn't by the time 1998 rolled around, everybody hadn't gotten the memo. So people could have introduced some bugs, but they would be bugs, not design issues. But so it was deemed like it's designed to be Y2K compliant, but from a testing point of view, we don't trust developers. We need to actually show that it's Y2K compliant. So it was deemed to be basically just a testing problem. And then it didn't turn out to be. There were a bunch of bugs, that developers had to work on.
Okay. So Bill Gates says it's Y2K compliant. The design doesn't necessarily fully line up there when you get to it. And then it turns out that it seemed to be a testing problem. So that's a pretty big bird to get stuck with.
I'll say, and not only that, we had to test. So there were a bunch of things that went on. And I must acknowledge the fact that it was a company-wide initiative to make Microsoft products Y2K compliant. And it was run by, and whoever decided to do this, but there was a Y2K czar, I called him. He had another title. His name was Rich Kaplan, Kaplan. And he convened meetings and we discussed issues company-wide among the representatives, obviously. And he knew about what was going on the legal front. So various and sundry countries were passing laws about you can't sell software in our country unless it's Y2K compliant. And they would define what that was, which wasn't necessarily our definition.
Interesting. Okay.
So he had his fingers in international dealing with that. Right. Then we had to decide, we had a bunch of decisions to make, one of which is, are we going to support all software that Microsoft has ever produced? And the answer to that is, well, no. Can we come up with a list of software that we're not going to support? Now you're asking us to define what Microsoft ever produced. That turned out to be a difficult problem. So we came up with basically a list of 3 classes of software. Software like Windows NT or whatever, where it's currently being supported. We will test for Y2K bugs and we will fix them. And they will be ready to be installed before Y2K. Then we had another list of software that we will not fix, but we'll test. And we'll tell you whether or not it passed the Y2K compliance testing. So if you're using it, we'll tell you, oh, it failed this. And if that's important to you, perhaps you should get a newer version. Right? But I mean, that's at least these are for old stuff, right? And then there's a list of like software we're not even going to test. But we wanted to enumerate those to flesh out people that said, hey, what about this piece of software which isn't on any of the other lists, right? It's like, what is this? And we'll go, we don't know. Tell us more about it. Because software engineering and sustained engineering teams weren't big in the old days at all. So just enumerating what we supported and the level of support was important to go through. That activity paid for itself when we started getting into security bugs in the early 2000s, because who is this software? Where did this come from? Who owns this? All of those questions when a worm is going through the internet and using your software, it's good not to look like Keystone Cops. So we did from time to time, but that was like the start of like, we need to enumerate what we support, right? What is it called? What is this version numbers? That sort of stuff. We can't just slap stuff on the net and hope for the best. So
before that, was there not like a third, deprecation schedule or plans
no,
for
there
things?
wasn't. No,
Okay, so it was just kind of
no.
we stopped supporting stuff sometimes, but wouldn't necessarily announce it, and then some stuff would just go ongoing. And oh wow, that's a really interesting spillover.
I remember. So there's this guy who was head of Windows Test, a guy named Somagase. He's still, I think he's no, he just retired, and he was head mucky muck some sort. And I remember coming into the office. He says, "Chris, I need to come up with a policy for when we're going to stop supporting Windows NT product. What I'm thinking this, like, and that was like in the 1998 time frame, 99, because customers are asking. If customers don't ask, you don't work on stuff that customers don't ask for. That's not
Yeah,
true because but he
but it
was,
does help if they're asking for it for sure, right?
well,
You
yeah.
get some customers asking, like, oh yeah, maybe we should look at this.
I think he was trying to set it to like 3 years or 4 years. That did not go down. I think it settled at 7 for a while, and
That seems
and then it turns out that that wasn't completely acceptable. So they started doing things like, well, you can have support after 7 if you pay us a lot of money.
there's probably some of that still going on. I'm guessing
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
get a
Because
custom agreement.
some big companies are kind of going, it's going to cost us more money to get off than to support
Yeah,
that.
makes sense.
Uh,
So something you mentioned a second ago was critical programs, that folks were worried about. And so before we move too far off of this, I was curious if you could, speak a little bit to what your understanding of that was, because, I think what the fear was for why this whole thing seemed like it could be a big deal, right? I mean, people were really worried about some of these critical programs and potentially the impact for, just
right.
Joe Q public.
Well, so, what would you think if you jumped onto the internet and all of a sudden it went over Y2K and half your routers went down?
Yeah, that would. I
That would
mean,
really hurt.
that would hurt. That would be a little disconcerting.
And what would happen if basically some of those routers were controlling power station? And
Yeah, of course. So everything goes down. So the fear is power stations are going to go down, which then leads to
power stations, traffic lights, lots of infrastructure run on computers. And if they all of a sudden go, oh, even if they just go, oh, you need to reboot this computer, right? And enter in the real date and get it going again. For a lot of these things, it's like just finding the computer, which is locked in a closet somewhere. It's, and in the meantime, you don't have any power. So,
so if you don't have power, how do you find the computer and then turn it on, right? So
right.
This becomes a big problem.
So people worried about that and went, at least we should do is get the infrastructure safe. And a lot of the infrastructure ran on Microsoft software. Sorry. And then tell the Excel guys, oh yeah, the financial guys, don't worry about Y2K. We have it, but we're not testing. No, you're going to tell them, if you're using this function internally to Excel, it's not too Y2K compliant. We'll make sure it is, but you guys have responsibility on the other end, right? So we were kind of Microsoft produced a lot of software that was at the base of the software that was riding on top of it that had to work or things would just melt. So don't forget, I don't know, what was the percentage of operating systems that were Microsoft at the time? It was like close to 90%.
Yeah.
So if Microsoft melted, the world would melt with us.
And this is do you think that, knowing what you know and being involved in it, this is without the work and the fixes that were put in place, that this really would have been something significant. These things that folks were worried about, like the power going out, essentially.
Yeah.
Really could have happened.
So one of the fears is we didn't actually know if the power companies depended upon us. We had inklings. I knew of one security bug that came through a nuclear power plant. So that tells you something.
There's something there, yeah.
So these guys are, and that turns out if you look at the license agreement, they're not allowed to do that. You're not allowed to put software on like nuclear power stations and flight control. It's like lawyers didn't want to get anywhere near that, right? But just because you put it on the license agreement doesn't mean that people aren't doing it.
Yeah.
So we didn't know, and they certainly weren't going to confess to us. So it was like, we have to do this. So, but the other interesting thing about that is these guys who are using it in very critical areas, they don't just do updates on the fly. They go through a process of installing patches or service packs and then testing. And it takes time. So we had to like work through those critical industries, ask them how long it took them to install and test, and make sure that our service pack that fixed all those bugs came out before that time so that they would have enough time to test and distribute their stuff before Y2K. So there was this walk back in time.
So I think I understand it. So that I understand it right, I think what I'm hearing it's described as, so you know who the customers are because we have a licensing agreement. So you're working with the customers, these ones who are managing these critical environments. And then because they're not telling you exactly how they're using them, you're kind of guessing, okay, well, I think this might be a thing that you should be aware of. So we're going to put this patch out and then we're going to push it out to you. And we need to know how long you need to test it to make sure everything works okay. And this is all working. You're backing all this into before the Y2K time.
Right. So we basically promised the industry that we would come out with a service pack that fixed all the known bugs.
Okay.
Well ahead of time, so that for all these industries that were required to do testing or not, or would anyway. So like hospitals that just don't change stuff. Banks don't like to change stuff. We don't know what the NSA does. They're a black hole. But these guys have requirements for backing stuff out, right? Which becomes very interesting when you have a live security worm floating around the internet and they go, well, we can't take your patch unless we test it for 6 months. And there's a worm in it. So it turns out, I did Y2K work and then I did security work.
Yeah, let's tell me about it. Go down there. You see, how does this transitions into there's a worm going around. I'm really interested to hear where you're going to go with that.
So first of all, you kind of have to stop the pain, right?
Is there one example that you're thinking of right now as you think through this that maybe we could set the stage with to illustrate one that hypothetically might have been going on or really was going on?
There was a series of them in 2001, Code Red, Slammer, and they actually kind of illustrate one of the problems that we had with engineering. One of those affected basically every Windows box. And it was a piece of code that didn't come from Windows. It came from SQL because it turns out they wanted to be able to support on every Windows box a certain interface to SQL. So they shipped this DLL on Windows because it was cheaper to ship it on Windows than it was onesie twosie it. So the Windows group was shipping a binary that came from the SQL group. So even when we found out that it was affecting Windows, we didn't have the code to rebuild it. Now, the SQL guys were, motivated to help. But it was like Keystone Cops to kind of get everybody like find the source code. But one of the ways to slow down a worm is to have a detecting mechanism on the network that would detect a packet going through of the right kind and then would stop it. And then you fix the bug later. Then you at least get it from going down. Now, some of those worms were really, really bad. The ones that I remember were what's called UDP packet worms. Do you know anything about TCP/IP or anything?
Almost nothing, except their acronyms.
Right. So anyway, UDP is this. It's basically you can just send one packet and you don't even need to get an acknowledgement back. And they had found this bug where they could send one packet. It would buffer overrun. The buffer overrun was big enough so that they could do some damage and send out a replicate packet to the next device down the line, or to like lots of devices actually, because UDP, everybody's required to like listen for UDP. So anybody on that network segment would get wiped out.
Wow. So you're sending one packet, which is a packet, a tiny piece of information, right?
5 minutes, let's say.
Okay. So you're sending one packet and some bad actor sends out one packet. the recipient computer doesn't even have to acknowledge that it received it, but because it's listening, then the packet's able to take action and then just replicate. And this is happening,
So
effectively infinitely.
Yes, right. So it had enough in that 512 to send out a replicate packet down the line, plus basically wipe out your server.
Wow. Yeah, that's
And
significant.
so, yes, those things were nasty. I mean, very nasty. I mean, like millions of machines would go down in an hour.
How do you find? I'm guessing you find out about this because, to your point, you have mass quantities of machines going down in an hour, and someone gets notified, customers start calling, and you're like, holy
Customers start
smokes.
calling. Yes, yes.
So
There were people who actually measured what was going on in the internet. Could tell you how many machines went down. And don't ask.
I think it's cool just to think about measuring what's going on. That phrase, measuring people were measuring what's going on in the internet is, and I know there are quantifiable metrics out there, but just to think about that happening in real time is it's pretty cool.
Yeah, there was UCSD had a little group that was doing that, and they wrote a paper about it.
Who was that? You said Russ. Who had the group that was working on that?
UCSD.
Okay.
Down in San Diego.
Got it. Thank you. So how do you stop that? I mean, you said the first thing you got to do, stop the proverbial bleeding, right? But I mean, this thing is replicating, this, at a speed that humans can't keep up with. So,
right.
I mean,
so you basically, yeah. So I don't remember the exact details of recovering from this, but it was extremely painful because you basically had to get the patch from somewhere. You had to boot the machine while not on the internet, because as soon as you put it on the internet, it would take over again. And then you'd keep it off the net, put the security patch on it. No testing probably because you don't have enough time for that. And then you put it on the net, and then you go down to the next machine, right? And you try to get to all the machines, even the ones that are locked up in closets, right? Eventually. Yeah, so yeah, customers were not happy at all. And when they asked us, so do you have any more of these? Don't know. It turns out we did. So yeah.
Do you remember what the idea behind this, some of these worms was? Was it just causing a little chaos? Somebody got an idea and was like, let's, this could be fun. Let's see what we can do with this. Or was it?
So the early ones didn't seem to have any use other than denial of service. They were just
Causing trouble.
Causing trouble, yeah. And I don't think they could monetize it. So it's kind of like early viruses where they just caused trouble. Whereas later they figured out how to use viruses to get money out of people. I don't know if you know anything about viruses or.
No, almost nothing.
But, so people typically nowadays are on the internet. Somebody sends you email and there's a little executable in there and you go, oh yeah, I need to run this executable. And it's got bad code in it, right? And it maybe does bad things, or it just says it's doing bad things and it wants money from you. But we started blocking stuff like that, and then people started getting around the blocks and stuff. The early days, there were floppy disk based viruses where the only way you got it is like if you got it on your floppy disk and you put it in your machine, and then it would just do something like infect the next floppy disk that came in. There was no monetization. It just kind of made your machine stupid.
I mean,
they did it because they could. They did it because they could, right? When they found these kids, they were kids, right? They were very young, didn't know any
probably
better.
really smart kids, though. I mean,
yeah, probably.
They figured out a way to cause some trouble on some pretty sophisticated machines.
So in the mid '90s, we started hiring people out of Romania into the NT group because we discovered, well, Romania was no longer communist, and they had a bunch of smart people there, and we figured, what the heck, hire them. Mostly they were like unemployed or overeducated and underemployed, might be the way to put it. And we noticed that a distinct drop in the number of viruses that came out of Romania after we had hired a bunch of these guys. Correlation is not causation.
Sure.
But I worked with some of these guys and they were great, absolutely great.
Yeah.
But some of them might have been bored, kind of going, I'm not doing any work. Let's see what I can do.
Yeah.
I remember interviewing this guy who was from Romania, and he looked over and saw on my bookshelf that I had some of the manuals from Microsoft on, I don't know, COM or whatever. And he says, wow, that's what it looks like. My copy has been Xeroxed. All of our copies have been Xeroxed. They couldn't afford the manuals.
Wow.
Right? So at the time, I don't know if they still do this, But if you're an employee, you could go to the book company store and buy them for $2 a piece. It's basically cost of goods. So I just said, thank you for interviewing, and here, have some manuals. Take them
that's
home.
cool.
You know, it was like, he thought he had died and gone to heaven. I don't know. And it cost me $2. It was like, it was kind of goofy.
That's cool.
But
That's a good
yeah,
little
so
nugget. I like that.
there were lots of people, especially from the former Iron Curtain countries, that were just dying to do something interesting, and
Yeah.
we did our best to hire them. So it worked out, I think, pretty well.
So
Yeah.
I want to, if we can, just for a minute, get back to, this is really, I'm liking the topics that you're sharing with me about, earlier days in tech. And something that stands out to me was I was looking on your social media and I saw this picture that you had. There's you, there's Tom Kurtz, there's Brig Elliott, Kip, Ranji Kemp, David Pearson. And so I was looking at this picture and I'm just trying to understand. My research said that it looks like that's effectively the people who were, some of the minds behind basic programming. And then also, which I wasn't familiar about with before researching, the Dartmouth time sharing system, the DTSS, right? So I think that feels like some pretty heavy hitters in the world of early tech. I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about just about how basic plays into the world of modern programming. And then also, for me, it was really interesting to learn about DTSS and how that's used, has been used for a long time, fairly widespread. It's a little piece of software that I had
Back in the
no idea. Yeah. It was used for a long time, right? I don't know if it's still, but it seemed like from what I read, it was pretty impactful.
So first of all, I want to make it clear I wasn't one of the pioneers. That was
Okay.
like a generation of students before me.
Okay. You're learning from these folks then, or working
Yes.
with them?
So, all right, let me just
Yeah.
give the timeline.
Let's
Okay.
hear it. You got it. Yes, sir.
So John and Tom were very much into computing in the 50s, but they worked at a small college in northern New Hampshire. It didn't have really any computers. So they went about getting some tiny ones, LGP 30s, 31 of them. And then there was this guy named John McCarthy that had been a professor there, and he invented the term artificial intelligence.
Oh,
And he had the first AI conference in 1956 at the college, which was kind of a weird little conference because I think it was a summer camp. These guys just kind of stayed for like 3 weeks and kind of ate in each other's houses and talked about artificial intelligence. Very famous guys, very famous. But it was not like
that's
a
cool.
conference for 3 days and then go home because they were just, I think they were defining what artificial intelligence was and stuff. So anyway, McCarthy ended up going to MIT and he invented Lisp there. That's what he did down at MIT. And he found out about time sharing and he talked to Tom and said, you guys should do this, right? Get a machine or something like that and you should do this. So they thought, all right, we'll put in for a National Science Foundation grant and we'll buy a machine and we'll develop time sharing. How hard can that be? And the plan was basically to get students to write it. It's like, and so they ended up getting this weird two machines actually. One was a terminal concentrator that took like 32 lines of teletypes coming in and would concentrate it. And then it would feed the one little computer, which was a GE 235 that was designed by Arnold Spielberg, who's Mr. Spielberg's father,
Oh, okay.
strangely. And they would run programs on that, but the concentrator would be the kind of the editor command line shell, strangely enough. So the shell lived in the teletype concentrator, and then the 235 would just be a batch processor, which would run programs and then give results. So that was developed by guys in 1964. And then it was kind of, they said, we can run programs, but that really doesn't help us because we could run Fortran or something like that,
Sure.
which came from the manufacturer. But that's really not going to help our student base. We need some simpler programming that people could learn quickly so that we can teach them about math. They were very math oriented. So they invented this thing called BASIC. And then John Kemeny wrote the compiler for it, never having written a compiler before. And it worked pretty much without bugs. There was one known bug. Wasn't the prettiest thing in the world, but it worked. And then I think the students then rewrote it because John wrote this compiler and then he took a 1-year sabbatical and went around the went around the world with his wife and 2 kids. And so the students rewrote the basic compiler. And at the time, it was a compiler. But the goal was to basically take your program, run it, and have it come back with results in less than 3 seconds. And this was on very small, very slow machines. And they reached that goal. I guess it was kind of amazing. So it was very interactive. And it turns out you could make mistakes and it would immediately tell you, you made a mistake and fix that. It became a much easier programming environment than, punching up cards and standing in line and putting it through card readers and all that sort of stuff. So they invented that, and then that became successful enough that that General Electric, who had owned the machinery, who had developed the machinery, they could sell copies of that system to other people because it was all written in assembler and stuff. It only ran on one machine. And so General Electric sold like lots of equipment. And they were like tickled pink. And so John proposed, why don't you give us a bigger machine? Why don't you give us a bigger machine? The first one was done on a National Science Foundation grant.
Okay, so they weren't gifts; they procured them through the grant.
Yes.
Now they're asking, "Hey, this is great. Give us
a machine."
Sure.
And someone was a good salesman, like a really good salesman. So they got a $3.5 million machine in 1966.
Yeah, that's significant.
That's money.
Yeah.
Now, part of the deal was that General Electric was going to be on site for about 2 years developing their own operating system. So we'd share the machine with them, and we cross-pollinated each other with ideas and stuff. And they went off and made tons of money on that, on their version of the system. And then Dartmouth kept the machinery, and we developed our own stuff completely. And that's the machine that I worked on later. So the school at the time didn't have a computer science department. They didn't have one until late 70s. But they were doing things like writing operating systems and writing compilers and stuff. But for general jollies, right? No classes. So the basic deal was you could be hired as a student programmer. They typically, you take a course and then they'd see if you could figure it out, program in assembler. And then they'd hire you and they'd pay you twice the going wage, basically, of any other student job, right? Which is always minimum wage.
Yeah. But if your options are minimum wage or double minimum wage, that's pretty good.
That's pretty good.
Yeah,
pretty good.
Sure.
Not only that, but if you're a computer geek, you're working with multi-million-dollar pieces of equipment and you're given chunks of things to do. You're not just playing around. So, but it takes you a while to come up to speed. So they like to hire you freshman, maybe sophomore year. But if you took the course like junior year or senior year, you can take the course, but they're never going to hire you because they need to mentor you. And I basically got back involved in computing my junior year. And by that time, it was too late to become part of the system programmers. But I definitely got in it and taught myself. And then I got hired. The university decided they were going to sell the operating system to licensees around the country.
Okay.
For $7,500 a month license fee.
That's not cheap.
That's not cheap. No. Yeah. But it more than paid for itself compared to the operating systems that were on there. So I ended up going to work for one of the licensees up in Toronto for 6 months. And while I was there, I just dug in. I had access to source code. I could play with anything I wanted. They just wanted me around to help them if they had any questions, but too boring. So I did a bunch of stuff. And so then when I went back to grad school, I knew my stuff and they hired me as a student programmer. I had to go back as a student programmer.
So these, and this is your undergrad at Dartmouth. You leave. What were you studying before you got into programming? Did you start with some sort of technology focus?
I didn't have computer science.
Sure.
So I was an engineering student.
Okay.
So I did hardware and I did signal processing for a thesis. So I did Fourier transforms. Yeah.
That's probably useful. I'm guessing that was useful information to have, especially throughout the rest of your career, useful background to have in hardware. Or am I totally wrong on that?
Yeah, I kind of abandoned it completely and went into software.
Fair enough.
But like the Fourier transform stuff was all software and I had to work with compilers and stuff. And I ended up maintaining compilers that generate code for my Fourier transform stuff. It's just a little weird. You do what you have to do.
Yeah, that's true. That's interesting. So you're there, and then go and you moved to Toronto for 6 months, and you just dig in, you learn this really heavy, and then you come back, and then you decided to do grad school also at Dartmouth, and then came back but
Yeah, so
revisited
I
as
went and
to a
got
programmer.
an advanced engineering degree.
Okay.
And then I worked at the computer center working on their compilers and editors.
Got it. That makes sense.
Because no one else wanted to work on them.
And then was your first stint after that with Microsoft right out of grad school?
Nope. I was like 40 years old when I started working.
Oh wow. Okay. So you done what was between grad school and Microsoft?
So after grad school, I ended up working for a spin-off of the university that was making a digital synthesizer, music synthesizer.
Oh, cool. Yeah.
And real time, we had our own little bit slice computer that we had developed. So I worked on the compilers and editors and all that sort of stuff, not the music side. So I was basically one of two developers for that. And we also sold process computers. So I did that sort of stuff. And
so
then
this
I
is
ended
the
up,
80s, right?
so
And
late
so
70s.
late
So
70s.
early
Okay.
80s.
So I
And
mean,
then
synthesizers were everywhere. I mean,
not
that's
so
not
so
yet.
these analog synthesizers were everywhere, but not digital ones. So
Oh,
we had the
okay.
first commercial digital one. And
Got
they
it.
went for like $13,000 back in 1977.
That's technology is expensive, man. Always has been, I guess, but that's serious.
Version 2 came out in 80, 81, 80. And that became like, it sold like hotcakes. It was like unbelievable. I can still hear the sounds from it today because I know what it makes.
So if it shows up in a song or something,
Michael Jackson owned two of them at one time. In case one broke down on the road, he wanted a backup.
The king of pop using your product is kind of fun.
Yeah. Well, there were other people too. It's pretty impressive lineup there for a while. Anyway, so I worked for them for a while, and then I went back to work for the operating system company again.
Okay, yeah.
And then after a year and a half, I wasn't there all that long. I started a startup with John Kennedy and Tom Kurtz to do a standardized version of BASIC. That there was a standards committee that was going to come out any day now with the standard for BASIC. It took a while, but we kind of knew what it was. We just started working on it, raised money, produced it, and we were competing against Microsoft, which had
competing against Microsoft. So
I don't think they were making much money on BASIC at the time, but there was kind of an emotional thing about not losing that market, I think. So we never made it.
So for those, like myself, I'm familiar with BASIC. I know it was really foundational for a lot of other future programming. How does BASIC as a language play into modern programming from your perspective?
So there's a large class of people whose first contact with computers was in the late 70s, and their first contact with programming was in BASIC because those machines came with BASIC on them, period. You boot them up, BASIC is there. You want Fortran, you want Pascal, you have to pay money. But they all came up with BASIC, and many of them were a Microsoft style BASIC. Not all of them. There was some like Sinclairs and that sort of stuff over in England. There's this generation of kids that were given a computer and says, you need to be computer literate. And here's a computer, and they would boot it up and they could start programming. Little manual program. And BASIC was very interactive. It would immediately tell you something went wrong. It would do even better on a micro. Never mind this 3-second pause while it kind of pumps stuff out. It was immediate. So you could, it was very addictive. You make a mistake, it immediately tells you it's no emotional content, just keep moving on, right? And then it gives you the right answer or whatever, and then you can build on that. And there were people that just loved programming back based upon that. And they later became professionals and they learned other languages. But for a certain period of time, like 20 years or so, basically if you met somebody who programmed, they all started with BASIC, right? And they still have fond memories of writing games and all that sort of stuff in BASIC, right?
Yeah, I mean that's really impactful. That's a really big piece of program history. I like that it's conveniently called BASIC because it seems very foundational, very fundamental for a lot of programmers. That was my rudimentary understanding of it as well. You described it much better and more eloquently than what I read about, than what I was going to be able to do based on what I read about online. So thanks for breaking that down. That's really cool.
So the goal was to be able to teach BASIC to liberal arts students and have them use it throughout their 4 years at college. And that since you could kind of assume that everybody knew this primitive form of programming. You could use it in classrooms. Obviously really good for STEM stuff, but it turned out it was also useful for sociology and economics. And they started measuring how many people took the course, and they started doing every year, and how many people claimed by the time they graduated that they had programmed in this. And it got up over 90% of
Significant
graduates had programmed in BASIC.
That's
So
significant.
there was just kind of this environment, right? Like computing was free for anybody who wanted to use it. The course, when they first started, I think it was 2 2-hour courses. And by the time they were 5 years later, it was down to 2 hours. They could teach you how to program in 2 hours.
So, and it was effective. Like, so someone like me could take this course and early days, 4 hours, and then condensed eventually to 2 hours. I could, in half a day before lunchtime, I could learn how to kind of program.
Right. So you could say, what's my mortgage on my house costing me? Principal versus interest.
Sure.
You kind of have to have some sort of a little background, but you could probably do a game which doesn't take a lot of math. But yeah, I knew a guy's father. He had an allowance that he got from his dad, but his dad said, you have to give me a spreadsheet, not a spreadsheet, a P&L, basically, an accounting of what you spent the last month's allowance on. And dad sent him to take an accounting course before he went to school. So when he got to school, he knew how to account for his allowance. So he got there, he took the basic programming class, and he went, I know how I'm going to do this. So he wrote a program to do his accounting for him, right? It was like, and that was like the first month he was at college.
That's awesome.
So it was like, you hear stories like that all the time, people doing weird stuff because everybody knew how to program.
That's amazing. I had no idea about how widespread it was. I mean, 90% of students coming out of college being able to have some sort of programming knowledge. That makes sense.
Dartmouth was kind of, this little pocket, right?
Sure.
People, but it turns out they soon decided that they were going to propagate this. So they went out and got a grant, and they got other schools in the Northeast to pick up terminals, and they would figure out how to get them to connect. And so there were a bunch of schools: Mount Holyoke, Yale, Vassar had terminals, Dartmouth, Harvard had some. They may not have been heavy users, but they all had access to it. And they all kind of contributed because there was this idea of open source. If you did a neat program, you could submit it and it would be put in the library for other people to look at. And there was, you got kudos for that, right? But you also it was kind of publishing. So people competed for that, for whatever. It's kind of like it's not quite the same thing as I need to do something, postpone. Once
Windows update.
Yeah. Right. And the funny thing is, I just installed this on Sunday. So
that's funny. Yeah, what are you going to do? Update Wednesday today.
Is that what it is?
I was joking. I don't know if that's really the day. I was just no. That's just. I actually kind of like the irony there that we're talking Microsoft stuff. We're both on PCs, and
security updates used to be Tuesdays.
Yeah, Patch Tuesday, right?
Right, and it took a while to get to that point where you do Patch Tuesdays. I remember being around when we were trying to figure that out.
And you've been through some really, really cool times in technology and some awesome experiences. So a little bit of a pivot, but I've heard these stories, right, about the early days of tech, and I've heard some wild stories. Like I read a book from Mark Cuban a few years ago, and he was talking about some, the early Microsoft parties and things at, tech conferences and just tech days in general. We hear stories about everything on campus and things that happen. And so I want to ask, first of all, any truth to any of these wild, wacky stories? And second, do you have any favorites? If so, do you have any favorites that you'd like to share, even if you want to share them anonymously, so to speak?
Oh, yeah. So I could tell, several, I guess. So we did the Windows 2000 release. Yeah. And several of us were invited to go down to the Moscone Center where the actual international release was done. And then I ended up doing the Geneva one later for another reason. But there were a bunch of us from engineering, not marketing, not sales, engineering, that were invited to go down. Brian Valentine kind of thought we had worked really, really hard. Go ahead, go watch it. There were a bunch of us, like a couple hundred of us, engineer types. And we were staying in this hotel, and they would say, look, we're covering you for dinner. Come down and we have these various tables and you can sign up. And we'll bring buses by and we'll bring you to those restaurants. So if 50 people want to go to McDonald's, we'll have a bus. 10 people want to go to like some fancy French restaurant, we'll have a little, minivan or something like that. So they had all these HR people there signing people up. And I noticed there was literally this French restaurant that no one was signing up for. It was like there were big lines for McDonald's or the equivalent. I don't know what was going on there, but it was like this French restaurant. No one signed up. So I went, heck, I went and asked. I said, what's so cool about this? And she dotted on it. I said, all right, sign me up. So there were like 15 of us there. I have pictures, by the way. One of which was Raymond Chen. And I guess they must have thought that we were rowdy or something, might have been rowdy. So they put us in the wine cellar. There was like a big table and we were just surrounded by bottles of wine, which were very expensive. And they come down and, take your order. And then they say, so what do you want for wine? Can't say no. But then over half the people there didn't drink. It was very bizarre. So I'm kind of going, we can't at least get one good bottle, right? Or a couple. There was actually a person that was further up the food chain than I, who was much more into wine. So I think he did the wine ordering. Made me feel good because he ended up picking up the check, which that was passed off because he was the most senior person there. He picks it up and then he submits an expense report. But it was like I looked at the total and went, no, I would have never drank that kind of wine if I knew any better. But it was like,
one of those, huh?
And I don't remember the value on that stuff, but it definitely curled my hair.
It was enough that it stood out to you. I mean, think about it. Was the wine, was it worth it? Was it that good?
I'm not really a wine person. It probably was.
It
probably was. Yeah.
That's a good one. Yeah. I mean,
so another one was, God, how does this go? When you recruit people from universities, you first go and interview them at the universities and you go, oh, yeah, we'd like to see you back in Redmond. And then you fly into Redmond and you run them through 6 or 8 interviews in a day, hour-long interviews. And then at the end of the day, someone from your school, from the guy's school, takes them out to dinner, 1 or 2 people who are recent grads, but not in the interview loop, right? They just, so they can answer any questions about culture and what's school like now and blah, blah, blah. Somebody who might have something in common with them.
Yeah.
And back in the day, you got this expense sheet that you filled out and you handed it into HR. It did not go to your boss. It went straight to HR. Recruiting was paying for this, right? And there was basically no restrictions on where you could take them out and how much money you could spend on entertainment. So I had some guys who took advantage of this, shall I say, and they were responsible for 2 rules being inaugurated on expenses.
Yeah, okay.
One of which was, and this is the mid-90s, you can't spend more than $200 on video games, which meant they went way over that, right?
Yeah.
And it was like, I talked to him about this. I didn't see it until later, right? And I said, what was it? It was like a 3D gimbal thing that you strap yourself into and it would spin you around and you'd be like dogfighting with starships or something. It was $5 a pop. And as long as you don't eat a lot before you start playing the game, you could do it forever. So that was one thing that got started. And then another one was, and these 2 guys were married. You cannot take recruiting, guys that you're trying to recruit out to adult entertainment.
Yes, of course. Of course.
They had taken this guy out lap dancing.
Oh my goodness.
And it was like,
of course.
You're like 23, 25.
Yeah, my gosh. Of course.
Taking like
That's
a 20-year-old out. You'll want to come work at Microsoft. We have fun.
This is what life is like here.
Yeah.
That's hilarious. Those 2 things are perfect. And they're also great examples of like you said, like there's like most policies have a policy because someone decided to push about it. People are like, oh, well, that's something we didn't think about. We should put that in the policy.
Exactly.
Oh, that's hilarious.
And especially when you think about, you're hiring people straight out of college and they're 20-year-olds and they don't see anything against it and kind of go, let's do this.
Seems like fun. Someone said there's no limits. So you gave us the credit card. this is what we're going to do now.
Yes.
Oh, that's hilarious.
We've heard
Those are,
stories from the sales side that are, bothered us from
yes.
engineering. But, let them tell those stories.
I've heard a few over the years from some of those sales conferences that are pretty good.
So we had
So,
this one problem that,
yeah.
problem as a manager and stuff. You get this morale budget, and the morale budget is a certain amount per month per person.
Yes.
And you can use it on taking people out to lunch or, maybe save up and you go out on a ski trip for a day or something.
Nice.
We did whitewater rafting.
Oh,
And I remember I kept going to my manager at the time and I went, "So how am I doing on my morale budget?" And he says, "You're nowhere near what we have budgeted." So I said, "So could you tell me what my budget is?" And he says, "No, keep spending." And the problem is that engineers would, they prefer to work. That's
yeah.
right. To drag them away from work for a day to go whitewater rafting or something like that was like, oh, come on, I want to get back to work. So it did take a concerted effort. So lunches turned out to be a reasonably good way to get rid of it. But even then, with lunches as often as I could never get up to my budget limit.
That's a great problem to have, right? I mean, trying to recognize your folks and let them know. And if you're not maxing out your budget, that's the problem you're chasing. That's a really good problem. I think that speaks a lot to the culture of the company, especially at the time. I mean, I'm guessing that that's not exactly the same limits as they are now, but
yeah,
that's really cool. I can see why people.
It's kind of whatever the culture is. They're not into spending money, and they kind of took. You've heard of the shrimps and weenie thing, right?
Yes, the infamous shrimps and weenies memo. Yes,
right. And people took that seriously. But somebody came up with this brilliant idea. So you go to a meeting and they're having lunch because it's like managers, and if you don't serve them lunch, they'll never have any food. If you do it at lunch,
because there's no other restaurants on campus. You can't
no,
find
no,
any
no,
to eat.
no. It's because they have 8 hours of meetings a day.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah, fair enough. Got it.
Right. So you invite them. You say we're having a lunch meeting, and you squeeze them
lunch,
in
yeah.
from 12 to 1, and they have lunch. And so the lunch is outside.
Okay, yeah.
Meeting room, and people are eating and going through the meeting. And then, all the food doesn't get eaten. So there was an email alias where you could report that food was available outside of this room.
Nice.
And then so the food didn't go to waste.
So then all the folks who weren't in the meeting then get the note, then they flock to the leftovers, sandwiches, and make sure it gets taken care of. That's a good alias.
So that was good. Unfortunately, people started reporting them a little bit earlier than the managers and stuff had finished. So all of a sudden you come out for your lunch and it was gone. So they had to kind of regulate.
That's funny. Of course. I mean, it's like the video game example, right? Like people are they're gonna push that limit until they can't use it anymore.
So we have 15 minutes left on my spot here.
Yeah.
Have we covered everything?
We got a few left, but it's okay. Anything left? I'm glad you brought that up. What's left? What would you like to talk about? I appreciate you just going with the flow here, but anything on your mind you want to talk about or share? Just thoughts, general perspectives?
The Y2K stuff.
Yeah.
I actually went over and talked to someone I hadn't seen in 20 years because he was my compatriot on the Y2K stuff, just so that we would be, because we didn't write this stuff down as our memories.
Yeah.
So he had different memories in mind. So he did some early code scanning, which later became a big thing for security bugs, static code analysis. We needed to do some of that for Y2K. So he came up with a bunch of scripts and stuff to wander through all of the code that we could find and find potential bugs. And then we could go in there and look at them and say, yes, this is okay, or no, we really need to fix this, and we need to find anybody who's dependent upon this, etc.
Yeah.
That's on top of the testing, right? We could identify where the Y2K bugs might be seeable and ask the individual testers in that area to test it after we told them what to look for. But then we thought we'd look at the code and find any other things. And so he wrote a bunch of scripts and we pawed through them. And he was trying to remember how many bugs he rated. He hand rated them because we didn't, thank God there weren't too many. So his numbers were 92 to 300 bugs, potential bugs that he had to look at. And there's a lot of source code. So
yeah. It's a good amount.
And many of those probably won't fix or it doesn't really affect anything, but he wanted to document that we had looked at it. That later became his work was kind of the beginning work of like looking for security bugs, which would fit code patterns, which we did using some research out of the research group, AST trees or whatever. It's kind of instead of looking at the actual source code, you'd look at the first level parse when all the macros were expanded and stuff, so you could see stuff under the covers, see what the compiler's seeing, and then you'd look for patterns. And that later ended up turning into Prefast, which was a desktop tool that any developer could look at their code as they're developing it and saying, you want to look at this. So we're trying to find bugs before they check it in. So that was the beginning of that. We didn't, because we didn't have enough reason to, kind of automate taking those results and stuffing them into the bug database. For the security bugs in 2002, we generated lots of bugs, which I won't make public here, but they were in the thousands. And then they had to be assigned to the right developer, and we developed ways to detect who the right developer was.
That's pretty awesome. I mean, so you had automatic detection and then automatic triaging to go with it?
We didn't do the triaging, but we needed to be able to create the bug and assign it to a developer who would do the triage.
Okay, got it. Yeah, I was using the wrong word. Good point. Right. So automatic detection, automatic assigning.
So, there's like, when we shipped Windows 2000, there were over 7,000 people who had contributed. So when you find a bug, you just don't want to hand it to a manager. You'd like to hand it to the guy who's responsible. So we figured out how to do that. That was, and a lot of that stuff, the processes were started because of Y2K, being able to scan for bugs, rate them, and then actually know who owns this code, where does it come from. That all became very important for security reasons.
Yeah. Later. I mean, this stuff is probably pretty standard now, but I mean, it sounds like it wasn't back then. Clearly it wasn't. You developed a process for it. I mean, I couldn't imagine now. You talked about 7,000 people contributed to the software then. I wonder what the number is now for, something like Windows 10, Windows 11, whatever's out there.
Like, I don't know. I was on for a while. So there are these things called showstopper bugs. When you're in the final months before you ship, every bug that gets fixed must be approved by a committee. Back in the day, it was what's called War Team and the War Room. And then they changed the name to be less violent to the Ship Room. And basically anybody had a veto saying, no, we won't fix this bug. Basically, you had to meet the bar, which was pretty high to fix a bug. And for a while, I was responsible for marking the bugs in the database and then sending out mail to everybody saying, these are the following bugs that must be fixed in 24 hours. And I'm CCing your manager, right, so that they know, and his manager. And I'm also going to CC any group that contributed to Windows, any development group. I had over 7,000 people that I emailed. And I can't tell you what percentage, but it was more than zero, of people that said, why am I getting this mail? I'm not in the Windows group. And it would be like some guy in Exchange, but Exchange was dropping stuff on Windows. And so therefore they were responsible for testing the changes and all the rest of the stuff. So it's like, but people would complain. I'm kind of going, talk to your manager. It's not my idea of a good time either.
That's funny.
But yeah, a lot of people contributed to Windows. It was the ship vehicle to be on.
Yeah, right. It was so impactful. I mean, that's got to be. It's got to. I would assume it's kind of neat to be able to look back and know that you contributed to something. Right? I mean, it really has impacted people's lives in the billions. Billions of people have used this product. That's really neat. I can't think of very many products in the world that have that kind of reach. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, well, so there's some more now, like iPhone guys, obviously. Sure. And some Google guys for Google Phone, etc.
Yeah, but I mean, maybe there's let's call it, a dozen or so of those that I can, you can maybe think of off the top of your head, which is a good amount, right? You can start rattling them off, but gosh, there's none that I've worked on, so I think that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Anyway, well, this has been awesome. Super appreciate it. I don't want to be the reason, I don't want someone's going to probably come knocking on your door here in a couple of minutes and you probably have to roll out, but I'm just thinking anything else you want to cover? Any parting parting thoughts or something that people have liked to share with me so far, and just some of their favorite memories of working with Bill Gates? Did you cross paths with Bill at all?
No, not really. I sat next to him during a Bill Gates review by accident. It was kind of funny. So it was a Bill Gates review of Windows security, and I was invited to come and observe. So it was done in like a boardroom or something like that. So this great big table and this bunch of chairs along the edges on the walls. And I come in and basically all the walls were taken, but there were several chairs that weren't taken at the table. And I figured out what the heck. So I took one of not the head or tail, right? But because one of the tail was done by the guy who was going to run the meeting. And I thought Bill was going to sit at the head because that's where he would sit. So I took one of the side tables. Bill comes in and sits next to me, leaving the head of the table to somebody else. I was like, what the heck? And so, they go through this. I don't know if you've ever heard about Bill G reviews.
I've heard, only anecdotally, obviously never been there, but I've heard that he had an uncanny ability to cut through fluff and see the root of any problem.
Right. So he had a certain hit ratio. Some of the times he was like way off base, but other times he got to the point. But the point was, when you show up for one of these meetings, you are prepared. You might be over prepared. So in reality, Bill doesn't have to show up for the meetings because you've already done all the work, right? And so he double and triple booked his Bill G reviews. He would only show up for one. And then he had a technical assistant at all times, and they would show up typically for another one. So Bill's not here. I'm the technical assistant. I will be here in this place. So you still had to be on, right?
Sure. Because you didn't know if he's going to show or not.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sure.
So you just prepare as if, it was a nice multiplier effect.
Yeah.
And I certainly one of the reasons why I went to this meeting is because I had gone through to several prep meetings for the meeting, help with the answers and all that sort of stuff, right? Get your ducks in a line. So I'm sitting next to him, and the guy would say something, and Bill would like whisper to me, saying, that doesn't seem right. It was like, then I started whispering back to him and all that sort of stuff. I'm sure he doesn't remember this, but it was like pretty funny.
That's cool. You had a connection with him there at that point. I mean, that's pretty cool.
So another memory I have about Windows NT. So Dave Cutler is a big figure in the Windows NT land, right? And when we shipped NT1, a lot of people did some shuffles around and got promoted and blah, blah, blah. And they made me a lead. And then they said, all right, you and two other leads in the test group, you're going to be internal support. And anything that comes through PSS that they can't figure out, and they're actually really good, you'll have to catch and figure out what's going on. Is there an answer for this? Is it undocumented? Is it a real bug? Whatever. And we would rotate. So once we do it for like a week, and then the next guy would get it. And come every 3 weeks, I'd get it for a week. And you'd get whatever bug couldn't be figured out through the whole chain. It would bubble up. And we'd also take some internal stuff. So I did a Charles Simone support call once. That was amusing. He found a bug. Very interesting bug. But I would get bugs for kernel, right? Which I had no clue about, but I could kind of figure out, oh, right, this is it. This is the data I need. I'm going to go to the developer. And I'd go to the developer and says, this is very important. It's blah, blah, blah. And the guy would go away, right? And I'd email him or something. And finally, I'd give up and I'd go to Dave Cutler saying, I'm not getting any traction on this guy. And he says, what's the problem? And I told Dave, and he says, and he wasn't giving you an answer on this? So Dave said, follow me. So we walked down to this guy's office, and Dave just barged in and said, you're not helping this guy with this bug, and it doesn't sound like you understand this, and you need to support him, right? Period. If he ever comes in this room again, support him. And then he walked out, and I was like, okay.
Did you get what you needed?
I got what I needed.
That's awesome.
Yeah. And
I love
that. Dave had my back any number of times that way. Dave was gruff at times, but he was very focused on solving problems. And so that was easy to deal with.
Yeah. Yeah. Man, that's a great story. And I love the fact that he was just, had that, hey, he just had your back, like you said. That's a beautiful thing. Solve the problem.
So there was another story about the Dave Cutler story, and I don't know if you should cut this out or not, But
Do you want me to stop recording before we?
So Dave Cutler came in with his crew from Digital Equipment, and his right-hand man, I would claim, is Lou Perizzoli, who had been working with him for 20 years when he came into Microsoft. And Lou was head of kernel, which included the file system, right? File systems are in there. And the deal with the showstopper bugs is showstopper bugs. Actually, these were stress bugs, right? So we run a bunch of programs overnight on people's boxes, and they blue screen or whatever they do, but they crash and burn. And you debug them, and you say, "Oh yeah, that's a pool corrupter bug or whatever, really bad," right? And it turns out there was a bug in the pool manager, which is the heap manager that's inside the kernel. They call it the pool manager, and it was causing corruption. Did I get this one right? Yes. So it was allowed as a bug and assigned to the developer. Well, the developer was Lou P, and you have 24 hours to fix these bugs. That was the rule. So the bug came up the next day in War Team, and blah blah blah. Yeah, what's the state of this? What's still being worked on? Actually, Lou said I didn't have any time to work on this yesterday, right? And Lou is like head of the kernel team.
Yeah.
Which means he's definitely a manager, right?
Yeah.
But he's also responsible for this big hairball bit of code that has to work, right? So Dave turns to him and says, "How the fuck do you expect your guys to fix stuff in 24 hours if you can't do it?" So, but I mean, they worked together for years, right?
Yeah. So they had the kind of relationship where they're gonna be able to drop that kind of. And it sounds like
Apparently-
that's kind of his approach anyway. Like he's focused. It's another example, like you're saying, of him solving the problem and just being like, "Hey, we have a problem here. Why are you having a double standard?"
Right. So apparently in my memory anyway, the story is within 24 hours, he made an offer to Landy Wang to take over development of the pool.
Oh, wow.
So
That's a big
Landy
change.
Wang,
Wow.
he's a big name.
Yeah.
So, and he came in, did a bang up good job. But basically, Lou had to be forced into a corner to basically realize, yeah, he can't do that and be a manager at the same time.
I mean, the kernel responsibility.
Yeah,
that's wild. Wow, I love hearing how those things shook out. I mean, because those are big changes and impactful moves. So you never hear these kinds of just this kind of backstory if you're not in those meetings. And I'm really glad that you were in those meetings so that you can tell me about it today. It's cool.
I took David at face value. He's just trying to solve problems and didn't care about it, whether it hurt people's feelings or not. He was focused on the problems. Easy enough to deal with. So Landy ended up later, we were working on doing some security mitigations. Well, let's say you have some pool corruption or some buffer overruns. What can you do to kind of make it harder for the attacker? And one of the things to do is to basically, whenever you load a program, load it in different places and move the memory around so that when the attacker can get code on, they won't be able to jump easily to know where other code is, right? And so that was thought of as an idea, and Landy pulled it off some short period of time. My memory is he wrote 4,000 lines of code, but it could have been 4,000 lines of changes, and checked it in and didn't have a single bug. And he volunteered to do this, right? This is I think we should do this. It would be really useful. And then he did it, and he didn't break anything. So it's okay.
That's pretty awesome.
Yeah.
I mean, I can't write 4,000 lines of an email and not have a single error in it. It's just to think about writing a code for something like that, or even 4,000 lines of changes, if that's what it is, not have an error.
You're allowed to go back and edit, right, before you submit it.
Yeah, but I mean, still, if I went back and chose the last 4,000 lines of emails that I wrote, seriously, and sent to someone or anything I wrote, I'm going to that's exceptional. I just think that speaks to the, I think that just really speaks to the type of folks that
so the kernel guys have a much higher bar for reliability because it's in kernel. And so the ones that survive in that area are pretty good.
Sure. Makes sense.
That's definitely.
You'd have to be. I mean, you got to be sharp to get in there and then to survive and thrive and be leading it.
So I was a manager, and I think I did okay at it, but it wasn't really my thing. I know I did okay at it according to my reviews.
Of course you did. Look, you don't last that many years, especially through that time.
Yeah, but I didn't stay a manager. I basically, in 1998, I went to my boss and said, I want to retire. I don't like this management thing. It takes too much out of me, and I'm not doing anything technical, right? And I've made my monetary goals. I'm going to retire. And he said, no, 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 don't go anywhere. I'd like you to stay. Pick any group you want to work in, and I'll put you there. Wow. And so I said, well, the security review group, they do code reviews, and they're always the top stack ranked people in 800 people, because I go to the stack rank meetings. I don't know if you remember what those were.
Yes, I joined right at the end of the stack rank.
So I could tell which ones were the top. And the nice thing about being in a group with the top, or if you're the lead, you're never going to have a bad story to tell these guys because they're always the top. Right? So I said I'd love to go work with this group because they're really smart, and I love the work they do because I was doing some of it at the time for fun. So he said, yeah, why don't you do that under one condition? You're the lead. And I was like, okay. So which meant I had to do reviews, but that wasn't too bad. But doing the management thing was basically you spend most of your time on your poor performing people and not your high performing people. High performing people, you just make sure they have enough work to do or they're going to find their own work. Back in the day, there was enough rewards, either stock options or bonuses or whatever, so you could always motivate them. I had one guy, he knew he was going to get a good review. And so I said, so let me talk to you about it, blah, blah, blah. And he says, just give me the numbers, right? Okay. So I gave him the numbers and he says, hang on. He gets on the phone and calls his girlfriend at the time, later became his wife, in England to tell her that he finally made more money than her. And then he got back talking to me. But I remember being talked up from a 4.0 to a 4.5 for one guy. And we didn't think that was maybe motivating enough for some stuff. So we had Bill Gates come by and personally thank him for working.
That's cool.
So, different motivations, it's not all money, right?
Yeah.
But when you're in a big group and you have a bunch of people working for you, you're not dealing with people like that very much. You're dealing with people you're trying to move out or find another position for them. So we had a big problem when Windows 95, the test group, kind of Windows 95 shipped and then 98. The testing group there was way different than what we had in Windows NT. They weren't as technical. So when they got folded in with our groups, we knew they were going to be hurt at review time. So I spent a lot of time with those people trying to find jobs that were more appropriate for their skills while keeping them on Microsoft. And I don't know if they do that anymore. I have to get out of here.
Thank you, Chris. This has been tremendous. Thank you so much. I really, really appreciate it. Thank you so much for the time, for everything, for figuring this all out. I really, really, really enjoyed it. We should do this again sometime.
4 F's with Jeff.